Tonight's topic is long overdue. It's the 82nd Airborne on the north flank of the Battle of the Bulge. Our speaker tonight is Guy LoFaro. He's a 1981 graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He also earned a Master's of Arts in History from the University of Michigan in 1991 and a PhD in History from Stony Brook University in 2007. He's a 23-year veteran of Army combat veteran. He served in a variety of command and staff positions to include 2 tours of duty with the 82nd Airborne Division, a tour of duty with the 2nd Infantry Division in the Republic of Korea, 4 years as a Ranger instructor and a company commander at the Army's Elite Ranger School, and 6 years as an assistant professor of history at on the West Point faculty. While at West Point, he was course director for the required 2-semester course in military history. He also taught courses on the revolutions, on the history of revolutions and revolutionary warfare, on World War II, and helped pioneer West Point's Battle of Normandy staff ride, a week-long exploration of the D-Day invasion conducted in Normandy, France, during which 10 distinguished cadets conduct an in-depth analysis of the invasion. For his performance both inside and outside the classroom, he was awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award, which is an annual award given to the History Department's outstanding teachers, and subsequently served as a master teacher, mentoring other professors on the most effective means to excite cadets about history. Because of his military and academic accomplishments, the Army selected him to be a strategist, in which capacity he helped formulate the post-9/11 plans for the largest military mobilization since World War II, and was the principal author of several other plans aimed at enhancing the nation's homeland security. He's currently working on a massive, probably what's going to be a two-volume set, 900 pages, book on the history of the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II from a command perspective, entitled The Sword of St. Michael. Now, I've talked to him starting last night, and he's a real pro, so we're going to have a great talk here. So I'll introduce Guy LoFaro.
Historical events tend to have or develop over time a popular narrative. That is the narrative that defines that event in the minds of most Americans who are not professional historians. Now, the popular narrative of the Battle of the Bulge is easy, and the way I see it, it comes down to 4 events. The first is that the Germans attack in December of 1944. The second is that the Germans murder American prisoners of war at Malmedy. The third is that the 101st makes its stand at Bastogne, and it was a valiant stand. And the fourth is that Patton rides to the rescue of the 101st. Of course, if you ask the 101st veterans, they don't see it that way. Now, all of these things happened. All of these things are true. But in describing the Battle of the Bulge in this manner, you overshadow other events which, at the time, were at least as significant, if not more significant, to the outcome of the battle than the 101st stand at Bastogne. So that brings us back to our topic tonight. That's the 82nd at the Battle of the Bulge. During the course of this evening, I'm going to attempt to prove 3 things. 1, I'm going to demonstrate to you that it was the 82nd that stops the spearhead of the German assault, and that they do that many miles north of Bastogne. The second thing I'm going to demonstrate is that during that defense, they destroy 4 German divisions, 3 of which are SS Panzer divisions. And the third thing I'm going to demonstrate is that as a result of the stand of the 82nd, they also rescued 2 other divisions from themselves being surrounded, cut off, and destroyed by the onrushing German panzers. But if I do my job correctly, really what I'm going to do is tell a good story, because it's a rousing good story. It's good against evil. It's great heroism. It's fighting against tremendous odds in incredibly difficult circumstances. It's about chaos. It's about courage. It's about confusion, and it's about suffering. Now, I'm going to do this in 3 segments. The first segment is going to be who are the major players and what do the major organizations look like on both sides of the ledger. The second segment is going to be a brief overview, kind of a one-over-the-world macro look at the Battle of the Bulge. And the third, then, is going to be a micro look at the 82nd in the Battle of the Bulge. But before we go there, we're going to return to this question of why does the 101 get all the credit? Now let's see if I can do this correctly. And I would submit that there's 4 reasons, all of which are shown here. Now this fellow in the upper left-hand corner is General Anthony McAuliffe. He's a brigadier general, and at the Battle of the Bulge, he was the assistant division commander of the 101st. When the Germans attacked, this fellow, Maxwell Taylor, who was the commander of the 101st, was absent. He was actually in the United States. So when the 101st goes to Bastogne and fights at Bastogne, it's this guy, McAuliffe, who is the acting commander. Taylor doesn't link up with the 101st until after the 101st is relieved by Patton. Now, many of you, I'm sure, know this story, but I like telling it. McAuliffe is asked to surrender. The 101st is surrounded. An emissary from the German commander comes through the lines under a white flag of truce and hands the message to McAuliffe, and essentially the message says, further resistance is futile. You're surrounded. Save the lives of your soldiers. McAuliffe doesn't know how to reply, and he just mutters to himself, nuts. When that emissary returns to the German commander with McAuliffe's reply, that's what it says. To the German commander, from the American commander, nuts. Now, when you have a pithy little phrase like that attached to a significant battle, you can't help but make history. The American press at the time, of course, caught McAuliffe's reply and splashed it across the headlines. The second reason is Taylor. As I told you, he wasn't there. But at the end of the war, Taylor, who serves as the 101st commander through the end of the war, gets a new assignment. He's going to be the superintendent at West Point. And on his way back to the States, he stops off at the War Department. And he convinces the War Department that the 101st should be retained on the active roles in a post-war army. During World War II, there are 5 airborne divisions in the American Army. The 11th Airborne Division serves in the Pacific. There are 4 in Europe and several independent regiments and battalions. But the 4 airborne divisions in Europe, the 13th, the 17th, the 82nd, and 101st, only one of those is going to be retained on the active roles. Taylor makes his play at the War Department. He's incredibly intelligent, incredibly eloquent, somewhat of a linguist. He can speak French, he can speak Spanish, he can speak German, he can speak Italian, and he speaks English very, very smoothly. And he convinces the War Department that the 101st, based on its stand at Bastogne, should be retained on the active roles. Well, that, of course, stuns many of the 82nd's supporters. The War Department initially goes along with Taylor's recommendation. It is soon changed, though, when people like Eisenhower, Bradley, Ridgway, Gavin, and a whole host of reporters who had fallen in love with the 82nd rise up in anger. But Taylor is not done. Taylor goes on, as many of you know, to be Chief of Staff of the Army, and then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Kennedy. And throughout his tenure and throughout his life, and the several books that he writes, he always brings up the case of the 101st being the finest fighting outfit the world has ever seen, based on its stand at Bastogne. Now there's 2 other events, and I know you're familiar with these. 1970 movie Patton wins 7 Oscars. George C. Marshall, the best actor. The movie itself is the best movie. The centerpiece of that movie, once again, Patton rushing to the rescue at Bastogne, raises again in the American consciousness this idea that the Battle of the Bulge is centered upon the fight at Bastogne. And then in 2001, this wonderful series, Band of Brothers. But as we all know, it's about the 101st. I think in all the series, on all the episodes, I saw one soldier wearing an 82nd patch there. The American public, once again, thinking, where is it that the battle is won? Well, it's won at Bastogne. Tonight, we're going to tell a different story. Now, as I said, I'm going to go through some of the major players, and I know you all are familiar with these. General Eisenhower is the Supreme Allied Commander. His strategy is what historians called the broad front strategy. In essence, all the Allied units are going to advance almost shoulder to shoulder from west to east against Germany. This guy down here, Field Marshal Montgomery, he doesn't like that idea. He thinks that he should be in charge. He thinks that he should get priority of supplies, especially fuel and ammunition, because his army group is headed toward the Ruhr, which is Germany's Detroit. His argument is, you give me priority of supplies, and I will rush to the Ruhr, where Germany makes its weapons, its tanks, its fighters, its ammunition, its ball bearings. If Germany can't make those things, Germany can't fight. And if Germany can't fight, Germany surrenders. Bradley, another Army Group commander, says, Montgomery's too slow. Don't give him supplies. He's a methodical kind of trudging along. He's a set-piece battle commander. You give me the supplies, and I'll get to Germany in a couple weeks. Hell, I've got George Patton working for me. This fellow here is the 1st Army commander. He, too, is working for Bradley, Courtney Hodges, and it is through Courtney Hodges' sector that the Germans attack. In Courtney Hodges' sector is the 8th Corps, commanded by this fellow, Troy Middleton. You can see old Troy there was a little cold. This was taken during the Battle of the Bulge. All right? Troy Middleton's sector is in the Ardennes. Right? The Ardennes is a very thick forest on the border of Germany and Belgium. It is well nigh impassable to tracked or wheeled vehicles except on the roads. It is an economy of force sector in December of 1944. What does that mean? What that means is that the Allies are going to accept risk there. They're not going to defend this sector as heavily as they have defended the other sectors. Why? Because the Germans are never going to attack here. Of course, the Germans did attack through there in 1940 and overran France, but that lesson so long ago in 1944 seems to have escaped the Allied high command. Troy Middleton has 3 divisions from north to south, and you can see him here, the 106th, the 4th, and the 28th. The 106th Division had never seen combat before. This is their first frontline experience. They'd put there so they could be seasoned, so they can get used to the sights and sounds of the battlefield. These 2 divisions are veteran divisions, the 4th and the 28th. They had recently been assigned to General Middleton's Corps from the Hurtgen Forest. And if any of you are familiar with the battle at the Hurtgen Forest, probably one of the poorest decisions that Eisenhower and Bradley made during the Second World War. It is a bloody, bloody battle, and units are churned up as they go into the Hurtgen Forest. These 2 had just returned. The 4th Infantry Division had sustained 25% casualties in the Hurtgen Forest. That's about 7,000 soldiers lost in the Hurtgen Forest. They were assigned to Middleton's Corps on the 7th of December. They had not received any replacements when the Germans attacked. This other division, the 28th Infantry Division, this one here, the 28th Infantry Division, had also been assigned to the Hurtgen Forest. It had been assigned to Middleton's Corps about the end of November. It had sustained 5,000 casualties in the Hurtgen Forest, and it only received 3,000 replacements by the time of the German attack. But yet, Middleton's sector, the Ardennes sector, 85 miles wide, 3 times larger than any corps should have defended, is an economy of force mission. It's a quiet sector. When the commander of the 106th Division pulled in, he replaced the 2nd Infantry Division. The commander of the 2nd Infantry Division was a fellow by the name of Walter Robinson. And Walter Robinson took old Alan Jones aside and he said, "Take it easy, General. The Krauts won't attack, even if they were ordered to." Then there's these 2 fellows. General Ridgway on the left, General Gavin on the right. Ridgway is the 18th Airborne Corps commander. Before that, he was a commander of the 82nd Airborne Division. He's never commanded a corps in combat, although he commanded the 82nd through Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. Gavin, at the time of this picture, and this was taken during the Battle of the Bulge, is 38 years old. He's a 38-year-old division commander, the youngest division commander in the United States Army since Custer commanded a division in the Civil War. At the time of this picture, he has 4 combat jumps. Tonight, we're going to have the great pleasure of meeting one of the other veterans of the 82nd, one of the very few who has 4 combat jumps. He jumped into Sicily, he jumped into Salerno, he jumped into Normandy, he jumped into Holland. He is one of the best division commanders produced in the war. Now, some quick organizational things. I talked about Eisenhower. You see, Eisenhower has 3 army groups working for him. Montgomery's 21st Army Group is in the northern part of Europe. They're aimed at the Ruhr. Bradley's 12th Army Group is in the center. It is in Bradley's 12th Army Group sector that the Germans attack, specifically in the 1st Army sector. And then the 6th Army Group is in the south of France. They really don't play a role in the Battle of the Bulge, so we're not going to discuss them much here. Now notice these two arrows in the 20th of December. I'll discuss this more later, but essentially what happens in the 20th of December is that Eisenhower makes a decision to readjust unit boundaries. And what he does is he redraws the boundary between Montgomery's Army Group and Bradley's Army Group, and he shifts it south. When he does that, these two armies all of a sudden work for Montgomery. Bradley is left with one army only, Patton's. When this shift occurs, important to our story here tonight, the 82nd also starts working for Montgomery instead of Bradley. Now we talk about the 82nd in a quick, because we're going to talk about these regiments, and I wanted to leave you with some idea of what I'm talking about. This is what the division looked like in December of 1944. General Gavin, that 30-year-old guy, commanding of the division, he had 3 parachute infantry regiments, PIRs, the 504th, 505th, and 508 working for him. He had 1 glider infantry regiment, the 325th. These are his main maneuver elements. These are the infantrymen, the vast bulk of the division. Supporting these guys are a whole host of support units, quartermaster units, ordnance units. But some of the major units that support these infantrymen here, paratroopers and glider infantrymen, the 307th Engineer Battalion, the 80th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Battalion. It was originally designed as an anti-aircraft battalion. By December of 1944, though, it is really an anti-tank battalion armed with 57mm anti-tank weapons. A medical unit, and then 4 artillery battalions. The 456th and 376th PFABs, or Parachute Field Artillery Battalions, are armed with the 75mm pack howitzers. I'm sure many of you have seen this in ceremonial occasions. They are literally howitzers that are about that long. A very short barrel, 75mm shell that are originally designed for transport in the back of mules. They use them in the parachute field artillery because they can be dropped out of airplanes. These 2 artillery battalions are glider field artillery battalions, the 319th and the 320th. They are armed with both short-nosed and long-nosed 105mm howitzers. Doesn't have a lot of firepower in the 82nd. One other thing. The size of the 82nd is about half the size of a standard infantry division in World War II. This is about 8,000 soldiers. A standard infantry division in World War II, about 15,000 soldiers. Lightly armed paratroopers, not a lot of supporting artillery, taking on panzers in the snow. Now let's take a look at the other side. These are the main players there. This fellow's name is Gerd von Rundstedt, a field marshal. He's the oldest general in the German army. He was a general in World War I. This OB West is simply the German designation for Commander-in-Chief of the West. Gerd is kind of like the Billy Martin of the German army. He has been hired and fired by Hitler more times than anybody else. He has just been rehired as Commander-in-Chief West, a position from which he was fired several months before on the 1st of September. When the Allies get word that Rundstedt is taken over, they think, okay, we know what the Germans are going to do. Rundstedt, an old Prussian Junker, is a textbook officer. He's just going to defend from position to position, slowly falling back in the face of overwhelming Allied superiority. We're not going to expect anything fancy from this guy. We know what he's about. We've read his book. Now, he is Eisenhower's counterpart on the Western Front. Just like Eisenhower had several army groups working for him, so does Rundstedt. And this guy, Model, the prototypical Nazi officer, complete with monocle, is the army group commander who's going to control the German offensive. Model, although a German army officer, is a fanatic Nazi, a great supporter of Hitler and National Socialism, so much so that at the end of the war, rather than surrender, he commits suicide. Model has working for him, essentially, these are the guys who are going to do the heavy lifting. These 2 panzer armies, the German 6th Panzer Army, the German 5th Panzer Army, Sepp Dietrich, Hasso von Manteuffel. Notice Dietrich's rank, General Oberst der Waffen-SS. He is not an army officer. He is a general officer, but he is a Waffen-SS officer. He has no formal military training. He is incredibly ruthless. He started the war as the commander of Hitler's small bodyguard troop. And I know many of you know this, but essentially during World War II, Germany has two armies. They have the regular army and they have the Waffen-SS. By the end of the war, the Waffen-SS numbers some 20 divisions. 20 divisions. This guy starts out as a bodyguard and rises to command of a 6th Panzer Army. It is his army that is going to be the main effort in the German attack. One other fella on the German side we need to make ourselves familiar with. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper. He is the commander of Kampfgruppe Peiper. A Kampfgruppe is essentially a task force. This guy is the tip of the spear for the German offensive. This is his organization. You can take a look here at what type of thing he's bringing to the battlefield. His mission, simply put, is to punch a hole through the American forces and go as fast and as furious as he can to the Meuse River without regard to his flanks, just like Rommel's 7th Panzer Division had done in 1944, or 1940, excuse me. We're going to replicate that with Kampfgruppe Peiper in 1944. Notice he has Mark V tanks. Those are Panther tanks. They sport the 88mm gun. There is nothing on the Allied side that can compete with that. And moreover, there's 30 Tiger tanks, also sporting the 88mm gun. Nothing that can kill a Tiger tank, except several Shermans or some really brave paratroopers shooting from the sides or the back. Peiper is incredibly intelligent. You can see he's somewhat handsome. He's tall, well-educated, speaks several languages, French, English. He's incredibly ruthless. Because he has to move so fast, he doesn't have time for the niceties of war, things like the Geneva Convention. So when he takes prisoners, he simply kills them. By 20 December, he had already killed over 350 American prisoners of war, 80 of them at Malmedy. This is the massacre, one of the signature events of the Battle of the Bulge. He doesn't have time to take care of these guys. They slow him down. He's also killed innumerable Belgian citizens. They're getting in his way. He's got a job to do. His job is to move out to the Meuse River. He can't be stopped by POWs or Belgians in the middle of the road. Quickly here, the organization of the Germans, OB West, that's Rudenstadt, Army Group B, Model, 6th Panzer Army. This is the main German attack here. Supporting attack under Manteuffel, and then farther south there's another army that essentially has flank guard duties. Because the German 6th Panzer Army is the main attack, it has the most firepower. I'll point out 2 SS Panzer Corps, 4 SS Panzer Divisions, a 5th Panzer Grenadier Division from the Army. It has the 150th Panzer Brigade. This is commanded by Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny is a lecturer in and of himself, but he is commanding a brigade's worth of Tiger tanks. They also have the 3rd Parachute Division. German paratroopers are the best infantrymen in the German army. These VG divisions, that stands for Volksgrenadier. And about mid-1944, Hitler decides he's going to mobilize what remains of German manpower, essentially very old men, very young boys, people who have maladies, people who have been wounded before. He organizes them to 30 Volksgrenadier divisions, and he throws them at the Anglo-Americans during the Battle of the Bulge. So let's talk about the lead up to the Bulge. A little background. December 1944, the Allies have stalled. I talked about Eisenhower's broad front approach. By conducting a broad front approach, what you ensure is that everybody gets supplies, especially fuel and ammo. What you also ensure is that nobody has enough supplies. So consequently, by December of 1944, the Allies are stalled. Their lines of communication or supply lines stretch all the way back to the ports that they came in through or nearby in Normandy. That's a long way to haul fuel and ammunition to the front. The Germans, on the other hand, are threatened from the east and the west. Obviously, in the west, it's the Anglo-Americans. In the east, it's the Russians. Hitler's idea, what am I going to do? He comes up with a solution. I'll attack in the west. I will punch through the Americans who he called a mongrel race, certainly didn't have the willpower like his German soldiers did to fight and win a massive battle. Once I defeat the Americans, I'll turn north and I'll destroy the British Army and chase them back into the Channel, just as I did in 1940. And with the British Army gone, the Americans will lose their stomach for the war and they'll quit the war. Having cleared the Western Europe of Americans, Brits, Canadians, and French, I'll then turn the full force of the German army on the Russians and defeat Russians. Hitler's messianic goal to save Western Germany from the scourge of Bolshevism. This is what Hitler says during one of his conferences. A single breakthrough on the Western Front. You will see that will lead to a collapse and panic among the Americans. We'll drive through in the middle and take Antwerp. With that, they'll have lost their supply harbor. And there'll be a huge encirclement of the entire English army with hundreds and thousands of prisoners, like it was in Russia. It's a grandiose vision, but it's a vision that he pushes through his officers. He's able to push it through because his officers are cowed. They are cowed as a result of the 20 July assassination plot. I know you've all seen the movie Valkyrie, where the assassin looks strikingly like Tom Cruise. Most of those plotters were German army officers. Hitler takes his revenge on the German army. He kills 350 of them. He captures them, he tries them in these mock trials, he humiliates them, and then he executes them in the most gruesome ways. He also films those executions, and it is required viewing for every officer in the German army. He sends 1,000 more to the concentration camps. So when Hitler says, I got a great idea, which is really a harebrained scheme, no one has the courage to stand up to him. Now the second part of my talk, and a quick overview, if you will, of the Battle of the Bulge. This may be difficult to read or see, so I'll explain it. This line army I talked about earlier is going to secure the southern flank. This is all the U.S. First Army Zone. The 8th Corps I talked about is right about there. Now this blue line is the Meuse River. The German plan has two phases. Number one, headlong rush to the Meuse, gain bridgeheads on the far side. Phase two, rush to Antwerp. This is tough tank country. It's the Ardennes, as I talked about before. It is heavily forested. The roads are meandering. They cross innumerable streams and creeks and rivers, as we'll see later on. This straight line distance here is only 40 miles. This arrow goes from the 1st SS Panzer Corps, this is the tip of the spear for the Germans, to the Meuse River. Straight line distance of 40 miles, actual distance at least twice 40 miles. But still the Germans think they can make it. And then once they get past the Meuse River, this is pretty good open country. This is good tank country. The Germans thinking, I can get across the Meuse and go to Antwerp. Now I called this a harebrained scheme, but I remind you again, the Germans did a very similar thing in 1940, attacked through the same place, and they were wildly successful. Now I want to explain this, and I'm going to go back and forth here. If you can see this red arrow, this is the path of the main German assault. This is Kampfgruppe Piper. This is the 1st SS Panzer Division. This is the 2nd SS Panzer Division. This is the 1st SS Panzer Corps and the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. This is the tip of the spear. This is where they're going to win this war, or so they think. This oval represents the area that the 82nd Airborne Division defended against the main German attack. This oval is the 101st. Now I'll point out a couple of things. And I don't mean to belittle the 101st stand at Bastogne, believe me. But notice the relative size of the areas being defended here. Also notice that the 82nd, of course, is right astride the German main assault. Also notice that given the German assault plan, Bastogne, what do you always hear about Bastogne? It's a critical road intersection. It is a critical road intersection if you're attacking down here, but not if you're attacking up here. Now these two other circles, I'll explain them. This in the south represents Bradley's 12th Army Group headquarters. In actuality, it's further south here. It's in Luxembourg City. He stays there throughout the Battle of the Bulge. He refuses to move backwards despite an order or a near order from Eisenhower to move your headquarters. Bradley doesn't do it. He doesn't want to move back in the face of the enemy. This is the 1st Army headquarters. Remember that organization slide I showed you? This guy, Hodges, in the 1st Army, works for this guy. But when the Germans attack, and there's all kinds of Germans in here during the Battle of the Bulge, it's really hard for Bradley down here to control this guy up here. Remember, we talked about the switch in the Army boundaries on the 20th of December. That's why Eisenhower switches the boundaries. And in essence, from the 20th December on, and from the 82nd standpoint, this really affects them on the 24th of December. This sector right around here, north of the line that I'm showing, belongs to Montgomery. South of the line that I'm showing here belongs to Bradley. Eisenhower makes that change. And it has consequences for the 82nd that I know these gentlemen want me to point out. The final slide I'm going to show you, this red area represents the furthest advance of the German assault. They never get to the Meuse. They're stopped here, and eventually they are destroyed. Now the third part. Let's talk about the 82nd. Where is the 82nd? The attack starts on the 16th of December 1944 in the early morning hours in the 8th Corps sector of the 1st U.S. Army. The 82nd and the 101st are in camp near Reims, France. The 82nd is in 2 camps, one called Sweeps, the other Sisson. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. The 82nd and the 101st had just got back from Holland. They jumped into Holland on the 17th of September. Both of these units have been taken out of Holland by mid to late November. They had sustained tremendous casualties. 82nd casualties were 4,300. 101st casualties were 3,800. The idea is to bring them back to Sweeps and Sisson, to have them rest, receive replacements, recuperate, refit, and get ready for combat again. The idea is another combat operation, another jump. There's a lot of rumors. One of the rumors is a jump across the Rhine or a jump onto Berlin. Ridgway, the 18th Airborne Corps commander, says there is no way that these guys are going to be ready before 6 weeks. 6 weeks it's going to take, he tells the commanders. 6 weeks before you can use these paratroopers again. On the 16th of December, the Germans attack. 8th Corps Commander Troy Middleton, that cold fellow we saw earlier, has nothing left. His units are being decimated. The 106th Infantry Division, though it fights a valiant fight, it is in its first fight, and it's going against the A-team of the German Army. It all but disintegrates. The command and control is gone. The 4th Infantry Division and the 28th Infantry Division are likewise crumbling. Middleton calls back frantically to Hodges. I need help. I need reserves. I have thrown everything into the battle, and I can't stop the Germans. Hodges throws what reserves he has in. The Germans are still coming. He can't stop them. Hodges calls Eisenhower. Eisenhower's headquarters at the time is in Versailles, and it just so happens that Bradley is there with him. Hodges says, I need the Schaeff Reserve. I need the theater reserve. There is no theater reserve. There never was a Schaeff theater reserve. The only thing that Eisenhower had left were these 2 mauled airborne divisions, both of which were in camp around Reims, so they get the call. During the course of my research for my project, I had the great privilege to talk with many of the veterans. One of the veterans I talked to is a fellow by the name of Rufus Broadway, now Dr. Rufus Broadway. On the 17th of December, when the call comes down, he was Lieutenant Rufus Broadway, General Gavin's junior aide. Gavin was having dinner with his staff and some visiting officers from the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The 517th was an independent parachute infantry regiment. We have a veteran from the 517th here tonight. And in the latter phases of the Bulge, the 517th actually fights with the 82nd. They're having dinner. The phone rings. Of course, who's going to answer the phone? Well, it's not the general. It's the lieutenant. So the lieutenant answers the phone, and this is what he told me. The voice on the other end of the phone was almost so panicky that I didn't understand initially what he was talking about. But he said something about the krauts breaking out all over the place. Finally, the voice on the other end of the phone said, "This is Colonel Doc Eaton, the Chief of Staff of 18th Airborne Corps. Put General Gavin on the line." Gavin gets on the line, and Eaton tells him this. The Germans have attacked in the Ardennes. They've overrun the 106th Infantry Division. They can't be stopped. 8th Corps has nothing left. 1st Army has nothing left. You and the 101st are the only thing that Eisenhower has left to throw against German tanks. Your mission is to move out in 24 hours. General Ridgway is in England. General Taylor, the commander of the 101st, is in the U.S. You, 38-year-old Jim Gavin, are the acting 18th Airborne Corps commander. You get both of those divisions on the road within 24 hours, and I want you to send both of them to Bastogne. Of course, it's mayhem in the camps as the troopers get the message. One person called it a well-organized chaos. Troopers, new replacements, are actually hustled off the train, double time to the camps, given their weapons, given some warm weather gear. There certainly wasn't enough of that to go around, and hustled onto trucks. A lot of the units, especially the 508th, did not have all of its weapons. They had been sent in for repair and replacement. They have to borrow weapons from the 517th, in fact. The 517th later gets those weapons that they gave to the 508th replaced. Trucks start to show up to shuttle these troopers to the front. It's going to be, for the 82nd, over a 100-mile ride. It's the dead of winter. The trucks that show up are 10-ton trailers. They have no tops. The troopers are herded onto these trailers. There's not enough room for people to sit. There's not enough trucks, so everybody's going to stand. So they're standing in the back of these trucks, idling, waiting for the word to go, and then it starts to rain. These troopers will tell you about what that was like. Meanwhile, Gavin rushes to the front. He leaves the camp, gets in a Jeep, and he rides north. He's riding north to talk to Hodges at the 1st Army headquarters. Remember, his last orders were both airborne divisions are to go to Bastogne. He arrives at 1st Army headquarters at about 9 o'clock in the morning on the 18th of December. His mission has changed. You have to stop Kampfgruppe Piper. You have to stop the 1st SS Panzer Division. You have to stop the Spearhead, because we got nothing left, tells Hodges to Gavin. That means one of those airborne divisions has to come to this little village called Verbemont, and I'll show you that in a map in a little bit. The other airborne division will continue on to Bastogne. Well, since it was about 100 miles from the camps to Verbemont and not that far from the camps to Bastogne, Gavin calls back and changes the mission. 82nd to Verbemont, which ends up being on the northern shoulder of the Bulge, 101st to Bastogne. Gavin then leaves the headquarters and he drives to Verbemont, his new assignment, so he can do a personal reconnaissance. He's looking around. There are no American soldiers in the vicinity, with the exception of one platoon of engineers. Remember, the Germans are attacking with tanks, heavy tanks, Panther tanks and Tiger tanks. They need sturdy bridges to cross these creeks and streams. There's one sturdy bridge in the area at a small hamlet called Habillement. There are engineers there. Gavin walks up to him and talks to the commander, a fellow by the name of Lieutenant Alvin Edelstein, and says, "What do you got going on, Lieutenant? My name's Jim Gavin, and the 82nd Airborne Division is right behind me." Lieutenant Edelstein says, "Sir, I've wired this bridge for demolition. When the Germans come, I'm going to blow it." The Germans need that bridge because it is a stone and masonry bridge, one of the few in the area capable of supporting tanks. Gavin says, "Fine, nothing more he can do." 82nd hasn't arrived yet. So he gets back in his Jeep and he drives down to Bastogne. There he meets McAuliffe, the artillery commander of the 101st, who, like Gavin, had gotten in his Jeep and rode out ahead of his division. They talk in Bastogne. Gavin tells him, "I'm the acting corps commander. Your division's coming here. You defend this crossroads. I'm taking the 82nd to Verbemont. Good luck." And Gavin returns to Verbemont. Now, before the 82nd gets in place, let me describe this map to you a little bit. There is an action, a significant action, at this little hamlet called Habillement. This is Habillement right here. I hope you can see this. This is the Amblev River, a meandering river. It's not a river in terms of what we think. It's not like the Hudson or the Mississippi, but it's a significant vehicular obstacle. This area here is where Kampfgruppe Peiper is holed up. He's on the north bank of the Amblev River. He's surrounded by elements of the 30th Infantry Division, although they're not real sure where he is. They know he's here someplace, but haven't pinpointed him. Peiper, as I told you, his job is to move as fast as he possibly can to the Meuse. He's been bottled up here, so he needs to break out. So he sends a reconnaissance unit. It's actually about a reconnaissance battalion south across the Amblev through this town of Chino and Rachier, and they try to make for Haviemont. As Lieutenant Edelstein later describes it, I looked up, and all of a sudden there were Tiger tanks rushing at the bridge. Without much ado, Edelstein blows the bridge. The Tiger tanks can't get across this little creek called the Liane. Although it's a creek, again, because it has very, very steep sides, it is a significant obstacle to vehicles. The Germans pull back. There's another bridge at this place called Chevron, except that bridge is made of wood. It can't support tanks, but it can support dismounted infantry. It can support half-tracks. The Germans try another attack across Chevron. It just so happens that what wandered into the area is a battalion from the 30th Infantry Division. They ambush that unit and push it back across the Liane, and this unit folds back into Kampfgruppe Peiper. Now, I tell you that because that all occurs before the 82nd arrives. When the 82nd finally gets there, after an all-night drive, in that rain, in the cold, in trucks that were not covered, they form a circle around Verbomont. And for the longest time, although Gavin knows his mission, find and defeat, or at least neutralize Kampfgruppe Peiper, he can't find Kampfgruppe Peiper. Nobody knows where Kampfgruppe Peiper is. In fact, the rumors are flying thick and heavy in 1st Army headquarters. Some rumors have the Germans already across the Meuse, and as I showed you, they don't even get close. So Gavin decides he's got to move out. Now, Ridgway also arrives about this time. Ridgway, as I told you, was in England. He hops a plane back to Reims, France, dragoons an old Army staff car, puts a couple of his staff officers in the back, gets himself a driver, and drives all night to Bastogne. It's a treacherous drive. It's also foggy, so that his driver many times almost rear-ends the trucks and the convoys ahead of him. Ridgway at one point turns to his driver and says, "What's the matter, son? Can't you see?" He goes, "I can't see a damn thing, General." And Ridgway says, "Well, let's trade places." So it's actually a 2-star general shepherding a PFC into Bastogne. Ridgway gets to Bastogne, finds out the 101st is there, finds out the mission has changed. He spends the night in Bastogne, goes north, talks with Hodges. Hodges tells him the same thing he told Gavin. You got to stop this guy. You got to stop Kampfgruppe Peiper. If you don't stop him, he's going to tear a hole in our defenses that we are not going to be able to repair. Why? Because there's no reserves left. Here's your reserve. Gavin, looking for Kampfgruppe Peiper, expands his perimeter to the west. He sends the 504th to the north. He sends the 505th out here to the west. The 325th he's keeping in reserve except one battalion that he sends down south here. And the 508th he has in a backup position. Still cannot find Kampfgruppe Peiper. And it's not just the 82nd. Nobody knows where Kampfgruppe Peiper is. Until, that is, 20th of December. On the 20th of December, this guy, Colonel Reuben Tucker, as I stated, is the commander of the 504th. Tucker is one of the foremost regimental combat commanders of the war. Tucker commands the 504th the entire war. Many people who write about Tucker in the 504th, and they say this in the most loving terms, call his troops a bunch of pirates that could only be commanded by somebody like Reuben Tucker. Reuben Tucker has no truck with the niceties of administration of logistics. His job is to kill Nazis, and that's what he's going to do. Gavin shows up at Tucker's command post, and they start talking about some reports that fleeing Belgian civilians have told him. Tucker informed Gavin that he had just received intelligence from civilians to the effect that approximately 125 German vehicles, including 30 tanks, were up here at the small village of Chino. Gavin says, "What do you want to do?" Tucker says, "I want to attack and take their tanks away from them." Now that's awful brave words for a bunch of paratroopers armed with perhaps the heaviest thing being a bazooka or a Browning automatic rifle. But Gavin knew Tucker. And Tucker, in fact, not only had some damn fine troopers, he also had a truckload of German Panzerfausts, which were the best anti-tank weapons of the war. So Gavin says, "Go for it." Tucker sends his 1st Battalion. Actually, it's only a part of his 1st Battalion. He only has 2 companies of that 1st Battalion to attack up this road. He meets the Germans at Chino. His troopers overrun the outposts. But then they get to the outskirts of Chino and they run into barbed wire and open fields of fire, and they're pinned down. The troopers are attempting to attack in 4 waves. According to the 504th After Action Report of this battle, they're pinned down for about 15 minutes until one soldier, Staff Sergeant George Walsh of B Company, finally gets up and says, "Let's get those sons of bitches," and runs at the Germans, and everybody follows. According to the AAR, it continues, "The men fired until the ammunition was exhausted. Then they used their rifles as clubs and drew trench knives as they converged on the roadblock and then engaged the enemy in close-in fighting." By night of the 20th, those two companies of paratroopers had fought their way into this small village of Chino and were holding the southern port of Chino, while the remainder, about a reinforced armor battalion from Kampfgruppe Piper, was holding the northern part of Chino. They needed help. So Tucker decides to take another of his battalions. This is the 3rd of the 504th, under Lieutenant Colonel Julian Cook. If any of you have seen the movie The Bridge Too Far, that's Robert Redford. He's the one who led the assault across the Vaal River. Julian Cook, another proven combat commander, and Tucker lead the 3504th in a roundabout way and get behind the Germans. So now Tucker has paratroopers to the north of the Germans and paratroopers to the south of the Germans, and he attacks on the 21st of December. And what Germans he doesn't kill or destroy or take prisoner escape across the Amblev. By this time, this is the last foray of Kampfgruppe Piper. They are destroyed and combat ineffective. They just sit there for several days. We'll talk more about them in a little bit. But Kampfgruppe Piper and the threat that had been weighing so heavily on the minds of people at 1st Army and 12th Army Group and even SHAEF is gone. But there's another threat. And that's at a place called Saint-Vith. Now, these are pictures of the American forces that are surrounded there. There are 2 divisions surrounded there and innumerable smaller elements. The 7th Armored Division and what remains of the 106th Infantry Division. They are about to be surrounded, cut off, and destroyed. Ridgway's plan is to save them. Saint-Vith is several miles, approximately 27 miles, southwest of the 82nd's positions. The problem is there's a 27-mile gap between the besieged Americans at Saint-Vith and the 82nd. Ridgway decides, well, I'm just going to attack with my entire corps. I've got the 30th Infantry Division, I've got the 3rd Armored Division, which had come up, and I've got the 82nd. So I'm going to put all these divisions online, and they're going to attack in a southwesterly direction. They're going to link up with those besieged settlers at Saint-Vith, and they're going to rescue them. So he jumps off on the 20th of December. The problem is that neither the 30th Division nor the 3rd Armored Division are able to move. So when Ridgway moves out, the only people who move are the 82nd. And they form a horseshoe-shaped perimeter here. You can see it here. The 504th in the north, keeping an eye on Kampfgruppe Piper, the 505th and the 508th along the Somme River, the 325th along the lower part of the horseshoe. Here are the surrounded elements of the 7th Armor and the 106th Infantry Division. The idea is to hold this perimeter as long as they possibly can to keep these 2 passageways open so that these guys can fight a fighting withdrawal and escape behind the 82nd lines. The 82nd has to hold this line. The 82nd doesn't hold this line, These guys get cut off and destroyed. One other thing I want you to note about this map. Notice there are no American units here. This is where the 3rd Armored Division is supposed to be. The 325th flank is in the air, as military historians like to say it. There's nothing protecting these guys. And we'll talk more about that later. The first action that occurs along this horseshoe-shaped perimeter is up here at Trois-Ponts. This is with the battalion of the 2nd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. This guy is the battalion commander, Ben Vandervoort, who was later wounded in the Battle of the Bulge and sits out the rest of the war. Several years ago, I had the great opportunity to spend some time with some veterans of the 505th in World War II. And one of Vandervoort's subordinates came up to me, a fellow by the name of Doc Franco. I don't know if any of you gentlemen know Doc Franco. Doc Franco says, "Hey, you know Ben Vandervoort?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do." He goes, "You know, John Wayne played his role in that movie, The Longest Day." I said, "Yeah, I know that." He goes, "John Wayne was a pipsqueak compared to Ben Vandervoort." This is what's developing up here. As I told you, this guy's Kampfgruppe Piper has been neutralized. The rest of the 1st SS Panzer Division is massing over here. The Germans decide that they're going to try to break through and link up with Kampfgruppe Piper, adding their combat power to his, and re-energize this advance. The 505th's job is to stop them. They're going to attack at this place called Trois-Ponts, which, for those of you who speak French, means 3 bridges. It is called that because there are 3 bridges here at the confluence of the Salm River and the Amblev River. When Vandervoort shows up, he throws one of his companies across the river. And they're sitting in their defensive positions, knowing that the Germans are ready to attack, but not knowing when, and certainly not knowing how many. Well, they answer the second question at 9:45 in the morning on 21 December, when one company of paratroopers on the east side of the river, that's about 120 folks, is attacked by 800 SS Panzer Grenadiers, supported by tanks and self-propelled guns. Now, fortunately for the paratroopers, what the Panzer Grenadiers did is they came at them in waves, just yelling and screaming. Yelling and screaming. No tactical finesse. None at all. Afterwards, one of the interrogation officers asked a prisoner from this attack, "Why did you do that? You guys are veterans of the Eastern Front. Why no tactical finesse?" And the reply he got was that was what they had been doing ever since the start of this offensive, and up to now, every American unit they had run into had either run away or surrendered. But not the one company from Vandervoort. They decimated those Panzer Grenadiers. And then the Germans started bringing up tanks, more and more tanks. Vandervoort throws another company across the river. Then he throws his 3rd company across the river. He's got his entire battalion on the wrong side of the Salm, because if they get cut off and destroyed, there's nothing between this Panzer Division and that Kampfgruppe Piper. He's going to smash into the rear of the 504th. But Vandervoort conducts a fighting withdrawal, and he fights his battalion back to the Salm River, crosses over the Salm, and destroys the bridge. The Germans are stuck on the east side, but still they continue to attack. And that night, approximately 200 Panzer Grenadiers attempt to wade the Salm River. Vandervoort's troopers had them in his sights, and as Vandervoort succinctly says, they waded into the river, they started across the river, they never got to the other bank. This is a 2-day battle. On the next day, the 1st SS Panzer Division tries again. They widen their attacks. Once again, the Germans never get across the river, or those few who do are hunted down by the 505th troopers and either taken prisoner or killed. This ends up with the destruction or the neutralization of Kampfgruppe Piper and the destruction of the rest of the 1st of the SS Panzer Division. That division is withdrawn from combat and never again sees any action in the Battle of the Bulge. It is combat ineffective. Now, you've defeated them up here. The problem is this flank down here, and we talked about it before. It's up in the air. Some other things. The Germans were massing down here. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, the 9th SS Panzer Division, the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division. They're down here. They want to break through this road. Notice these numbers. These are two of the very few roads in the Ardennes that is trafficable to tanks the size of Tigers and trucks. N15 runs generally north-south, N28 east-west. They intersect at a little place called Baraka des Frature. This is a picture of Baraka des Frature. It's unique in that this is, believe it or not, as small a hamlet as this is, the highest point in the Ardennes. It's also where these two high-speed avenues of approach intersect. The Germans want that intersection. Why? Because they got to bust through to these roads, especially this one. Why is that important? Because there's a huge traffic jam back here. And these guys are all but stalled. And until they break through here, ain't nobody going anywhere. So the Germans attack on the 23rd of December. The first place they attack is Frature, where the 2nd of the 325th is defending. They take Frature, but then the battalion commander counterattacks and takes Frature back and pushes a regiment of SS troopers out of Frature. The SS comes south and then tries another attack. They attack at this crossroads here, Baraka des Frature. In essence, there's the crossroads of Baraka des Frature, and then this village is about 3/4 of a mile away. There's one company of paratroopers at Baraka, the crossroads here. There's also a smattering, an ad hoc collection of other units that had been retreating north. Some tanks, some tank destroyers, some artillery, some anti-aircraft. The Germans attack once again with 2 companies of tanks and a regiment of Panzer Grenadiers. These guys hold out as long as they can. The paratroopers fighting amongst them find later on in the battle that they have to take over command of the Sherman tanks because the Sherman tank crews, knowing full well that the Sherman tank is no match for a Tiger or a Panther, have abandoned their posts. The paratroopers then pressed themselves in the service, if you will, as tank commanders and attempt to take on the German tanks. They are unsuccessful. Every American tank and tank destroyer at this crossroads is destroyed. This company goes into battle at about 114 men. It returns from this battle with 42 men. The survivors retreat to Frature. This is a small victory, though, for the Germans, because though they have this crossroads, they don't have this village. And without this village, they don't have control of this road. And without control of this road, this huge traffic jam is not getting fixed. So what do? They attack the next day. The first attack is by this unit, the Führer-Begleit Brigade. We've not talked about that before, but in essence, this is a mini Panzer division. They attack at a place called Regnet against the 2nd of the 401st Infantry, which is a battalion in the 325th. They take Regnet, and then just as happened before at Frature, the 2nd and the 401st counterattacks and pushes them back. Later on that day, the 2nd SS Panzer Division appears again and attacks through Frature, through Baraka des Frature, up to Frature. This guy, Colonel Charles Billingsley, is the commander of the 325th. Billingsley is about 6'7". He's way too tall to be a paratrooper. In fact, he's the tallest paratrooper in the division. But he's a hell of a combat commander. He maneuvers his soldiers successfully, essentially using the terrain against the Germans. When the Germans are attacking in tanks and half-tracks, they are confined to the roads. Paratroopers are not confined to the roads. So there is innumerable ambushes. And although the 2nd SS Panzer Division has this crossroads, and in this attack actually takes Frature, the paratroopers there or the glidermen there can't hold out against overwhelming odds, they too fall back. The SS still cannot use this road because there's paratroopers in packs and glidermen in packs all around here. Then another significant event occurs, this time in the Allied High Command. Remember I told you about how things change. It's the 24th of December, and a strange figure walks into the 82nd Command Post. That figure is Field Marshal Montgomery. Montgomery says it's time to tidy up the battlefield. Montgomery likes tidy things. He is a master of the set-piece battle. He doesn't like the fact that the 82nd is strung out down here, especially given the fact that there's no one here. He wants the 82nd to pull back and shorten its lines up here. Now, this doesn't set well with anyone, especially Gavin. And Gavin says, I was greatly concerned with the attitude of the troops toward withdrawal, the division having never made a withdrawal in its combat history. Lieutenant James Magellas of the 504th echoed these comments. The withdrawal order did not set well with my platoon and me. And Bill Lord, trooper from the 508th, says the withdrawal order was a complete shock to everyone. The 82nd Airborne Division, which had prided itself on its record, no ground gained ever relinquished, was moving back. But back they did. Although Gavin protested, as did Ridgway, Field Marshal Montgomery was, after all, Field Marshal Montgomery. And an order is an order. So the 82nd is forced to withdraw from this position to a position up here. Gavin issues the order in the afternoon of the 24th of December. The order is executed during the night of the 24th, 25th December. Now you'll note this is the perimeter that they held. These guys have been successfully withdrawn on the 23rd of December. It's now the evening of the 24th, 25th December. And the 82nd pulls back to this position. Now, how do you conduct a withdrawal? You don't just get up and start walking to the rear, that's for sure, because the Germans will follow you. So what you do is you leave a covering force in place. And in this case, a covering force consisted of about a platoon from each company. And at the appointed time, the main body, not the division minus the covering force, began moving to the rear to take up its new positions along this line. The covering force remained in place until to fool the Germans into thinking that the 82nd was still in place. They do so successfully. This, although it is a move to the rear, and I know it does not sit well with any veteran of the 82nd. It's not a retreat, it's a withdrawal. But this is executed masterfully. Everywhere except one place. That is in the area of the 3505th, which is right about here. What happens is that while the 82nd is withdrawing to its new positions, the remnants of Comp Group Piper, remember they were up here? They're withdrawing this way. So the 3505th is moving this way, the Comp Group Piper is moving this way. They abandoned their vehicles, they abandoned their half-tracks, they abandoned their artillery pieces on the north bank of the Amblev River. They abandoned about 300 of their comrades, most of whom were wounded, and about 800 SS troopers start trekking their way in a southwesterly direction as the 82nd is moving in a, southeasterly direction as the 82nd is moving in a northwesterly direction. They cross paths. And they bump into the 3505th, and several running gunfights occur. And the 3505th bests Comp Group Piper. About 800 of them are attempting to escape. In one skirmish, the 82nd, after the firing died down, the company commander counted 125 dead Germans. In another skirmish, another 40 to 50 dead were counted. And as the remnants of Comp Group Piper are attempting to escape across the Somme River, that covering force, which is still in place, picks them up and destroys them in mid-river, hence completing the destruction of the 1st SS Panzer Division. When the 82nd gets to this new position, obviously having withdrawn from this position here, the 2nd SS Panzer Division, their old nemesis, continues to attack north. Now there's a small village here called Tri-le-Chais-Lang, and please excuse my French or Belgian, right? This is supposed to be in the 7th Armored Division sector, but the 7th Armored Division had not covered down. So it's a hole between the 82nd and the 7th Armored Division. Gavin gets the call, there's Germans in this village, Tri-le-Chais-Lang. He sends the 1st Battalion of the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment to counterattack. A fight develops there, essentially between this battalion and a reinforced battalion from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, later reinforced with another battalion from the 2nd SS Panzer Division. These guys initially take this village. The 1st of the 325th counterattacks, pushes them out of the village, and hence completes the destruction of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. This division, after this fight, is withdrawn from combat. Meanwhile, there have been probes elsewhere on the line by the 9th SS and the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division. Another main fight occurs at a place called Area, or Area. This is in the 508th sector. This guy, Lieutenant Colonel Luis Mendez, is the battalion commander. This is by the 19th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 9th SS Panzer Division. They attack in regimental strength, once again supported with tanks, half-tracks, and self-propelled guns. They overrun the American outposts at Area. But unlike most American outposts, those paratroopers do not run, they just go to ground. They just hide. The Germans sweep over them and sweep into this town of Area, where they are counterattacked by the remainder of Colonel Mendez's battalion. Meanwhile, those paratroopers in the outposts rise up from their hiding positions and attack the Germans in the rear. This Panzer Grenadier Regiment is destroyed and completes the destruction of the 9th SS Panzer Division. Private Martin Risnes of G Company said, "The battle for Area was the most aggressive German attack I experienced during the whole war. We lost a few men, but those SS troopers, Hitler's best, well, they lost a hell of a lot more." Angel Romero, also of the 508th, said, "The Germans came at us yelling and screaming, calling a roll and cursing Roosevelt. But their yells turned into screams as our machine guns opened up on them." For several days after the war, after this battle, Belgian civilians in villages to the south, these guys withdraw to the south to lick their wounds. Belgian civilians reported that for 3 days after the attack at Area, German ambulances were streaming through the villages with wounded from the battle. Once the 82nd gains this line, it is the high point of the Battle of the Bulge. By the 28th of December, the German attack is fizzled out all along the place. Everywhere, the Germans are no longer attacking. Hitler issues an order. Instead of withdrawing, his soldiers are going to stay in place and conduct a battle of attrition. Not a smart move, but that's what he wants done. Gavin writes in his diary, "After all these events I described to you, this has been an experience the like of which I hope I never have again. Our Army has a hell of a lot to learn, but at present, these airborne troopers of this division are making monkeys out of the Germans opposing them. They are better trained and far superior soldiers." Now, this doesn't end the Battle of the Bulge for the 82nd. On the 3rd of January, Montgomery issues an attack order. In essence, what he wants the 82nd to do is attack to gain the same ground from which it had withdrawn on the night of the 24th and the 25th of December. That attack jumps up on the 3rd of January. The Germans had had time to dig in. They're dug in along all the villages, along all the roads. It had snowed, and the snow had frozen. It was about waist deep when the 82nd jumps out, and for this attack, they had attached two other fine parachute units, the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 551st Parachute Infantry Battalion. These are independent units that are not attached, that are not assigned to a division, but for this attack, the 82nd was able to use them. The 82nd attacks to regain its positions. Remember, they withdrew from those positions in one night. It took them 7 days to regain those positions. 7 days trudging through that snow. One scout said, "I felt more like a snowplow than a scout," as he's breaking trail for the soldiers behind him. There's a series of running gun battles that happen, pretty severe fights that I'm not going to go into in detail. In one case, though, the 325th Glider is attacking and kills 250 Germans and takes 233 more. In another place, the 517th ambushes some Germans and take about 137 prisoner. The 505th at another place kills 315. During this attack alone, the Americans captured 2,700 Germans and killed 2,300. They were against the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division, the 4th German division that the 82nd destroys in this battle. This has been a tough road for the 82nd, the Battle of the Bulge. They had 255 killed, 1,700 wounded, 274 missing, and about 1,700 non-battle casualties, mostly trench foot frostbite, and other weather-related injuries. Now, I've been talking for a long time now, and I appreciate your forbearance, but just a couple of minutes more. Clay Blair wrote a book called Ridgway's Paratroopers. It's a fine, fine book if you haven't read it. He writes about the Battle of the Bulge, and he says, in the aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge, the tenacious and heroic stand of Anthony McAuliffe on the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne would capture the public imagination. Less well known, but no less important, was a similar tenacious and heroic stand of the American forces and the 82nd Airborne Divisions at Sanvith. Excuse me. Some historians and most senior German commanders believe the American stand at Sanvith was more important than the stand at Bastogne. Another fellow by the name of Lieutenant Colonel George Rubel, a tank battalion commander, and his battalion often fought with the 82nd throughout the war, wrote, these were truly fighting men. A squad of the 82nd Airborne Division will take on a company of the German Army. An 82nd Airborne Division company will attack a German battalion, and to assign any unit of the 82nd Airborne Division an objective is to know that the objective will be taken and held. And finally, I want to tell you the story about this fellow. In the midst of the Battle of the Bulge, there occurred one exchange that perhaps more than any other exemplifies the attitude of the troopers of the 82nd Airborne Division. It was the 22nd of December, 1944. The American Army was still in headlong retreat from the onrushing panzers that were seemingly everywhere. One column of American tanks came upon a lone bazooka gunner in a snow-covered bunker. The lead tank commander leaned down from his hatch to ask the lone trooper where the American lines were. The bazooka gunner, a private from the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, replied, "You've just arrived at the American front lines, pal. Now just pull your tank up behind me. I'm the 82nd Airborne Division, and this is as far as the bastards are going." Thank you very much.
Al Larson, our first veteran, he's spoken here before. Al is Minnesota's senior paratrooper. He made 4 combat jumps in World War II. Of 16 million people who served, there were well less than 1,000 who made 4 combat jumps and survived. Almost every one of them was in the 505th. And so Al saw a lot of war. The next speaker is Les Schwarm. Schwarm from the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment. His first engagement was in Holland, in Market Garden, and then he served in the Battle of the Bulge. Next we have Mel Dahlberg. Mel Dahlberg was in the 517th Airborne. He served in Italy, jumped into southern France, and then fought in the Bulge. And on the end is Bob Erickson. Bob Erickson was in the 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment. He was the first sergeant of the Pathfinder School in Italy. Went AWOL from that assignment so he could jump into southern France with the Pathfinders 30 miles off target. So be careful who you follow in war. So they'll be telling their stories. Now keep in mind that you heard the overview from Guy LoFaro, but now you're going to hear the foxhole versions of the war. And in most cases, you know, that's what they knew. They were told, get your stuff, go here, sit there, wait, shoot. That was it. And then go to the next place and do the same thing. So you're not going to get the grand strategies here, but this is what the infantrymen saw, the airborne infantrymen saw. So let's start out with the beginning. You're in a rest camp coming out of Holland, Al.
Yes, we're in Reims, France.
Yeah. And did you think the war was over?
Yes, they said it was going to be over by Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
We were just resting.
And
we were getting replacements.
Yeah. And what did you think when you got the word you were going north?
We didn't know what it was. We were all, how could they break through?
Okay.
But they got us ready. We all had to take all our clothes off, go in this building, get a shot in each arm, get inspected. You're ready for the front line. So then we went back and got what uniforms we had. We had summer uniforms. And they put us on trucks and And on the 18th, we went up in the front lines.
And what was the drive like in those open trucks?
It was cold, but we were really huddled together. There was somebody in each truck that we kept warm.
If you weren't in the front of the truck, what was your experience? How were you notified that you were going into the bulge?
It was a Sunday night, and we were all in the movie. About 8 o'clock, the movie shut down, and we sat there for about a half hour, and finally a lieutenant colonel came on stage and ordered everyone back to barracks. When we got back to the barracks, we were told to be ready to move by 8 o'clock the next morning. By 8 o'clock, we were on our move.
On December 16th. We had just come up from southern France, had 94 days of combat down there, and got in this town of, so it was a town where there were French barracks, and that's where we were situated. And at first, it was kind of bittersweet for me because I was under arrest. I had happened to, we had just, as I said, we had just got into this camp, and we wanted to see the town of Soissons. That was the town. And I wasn't getting out.
Keep the mic on your chin, remember?
Okay. I wasn't getting out like a lot of the guys. I wasn't getting a pass, so I said, I'm going to go by myself and just take another way out of the camp. So, well, to make a long story short, I got caught. And there were a lot of guys going out of this camp, and but they were going to make a big deal out of it, and I got called into Major Seitz's office, who was our 2nd Battalion commander, and so I got a lot of dumb duties and charge of quarters, and so anyways, as I say, it's a bittersweet thing because when we got this message that von Rundstedt had made his breakthrough, we got new weapons, got them out of Cosmoline and prepared ourselves to be rearmed. Well, here I am, charged of quarters, and they gave me a new weapon and everything, and so that was all forgotten. Got on these trucks with no 2.5 ton trucks and sent us up into the Ardennes. So it kind of, as I said, I didn't have to be under arrested at quarters, look forward to a court martial. So that was great.
Bob, you had a different experience.
Yes, I was in the 519 Parachute Infantry, and we 93 days in southern France, and we come up by 40 and 8 into an army, what had been a German Luftwaffe base, and they let a third of the unit give us a passes right away. And I was in Paris on leave, and went in, got a shower, gave me a new uniform, $40 partial pay, and we left. We went to the Folies Bergère. First time I'd ever seen anything like that in my life. And got a steak. I think I paid $20 for a filet mignon about the size of $1. Of course, they had a bottle of champagne with it. Then we went through we went down to Pigalle, which was the hangout of all the places in Paris, and we'd been in a couple of bistros, and we're walking down the street, and the Jeep pulled up alongside of us. Says, "What outfit you guys in?" 509. Well, get in. What do you mean you get in? The German have broken through in the Ardennes. Your unit's called up. So we got in. They took us back to the Red Cross, and I went in a room and says, "Well, we'll let you know." I don't think I was asleep more than an hour or so. They got us out and put us in trucks, went back to the base, and I got all my stuff. I got everything ready to go. I had 3 bandoliers of ammunition, my M1, and all my equipment that I needed. And we put us on these trucks they were just about a 3 or 3.5 foot side. And I think the next time we stopped was Liège, Belgium. And we got out of there and started to go down the road a ways. And then the truck stopped. Our lieutenant was in our truck. He jumped out, And they couldn't go any farther. According to quartermaster rules, the quartermaster truck has to have one terrain feature between the enemy and the troops. So they argued back and forth. They wouldn't let us out. So we got out. And I don't know, we walked not too far, and then we could hear machine gun fire and hear artillery fire, and we joined back up into our unit and got all displaced. Kind of a miserable night. It was the middle of the night. It must have been, I think the evening of the 17th, because sometime, the dates anyway, I was in Paris on the 16th, the night of the 16th when we got called up. And we didn't know what we were going to do. And we again were thinking, back there, like Al said, we were going to be home by Christmas. Fine Christmas we had.
When you arrived at your destination,
Where's that? Oh, yeah.
yeah, what was the weather like? And what
was
clothing did you have?
It was cold.
Did you have long johns? Did you have an overcoat?
No, I didn't. I had looked like summer clothes, but when we got to where, in the middle of nowhere, there was a big barn, and so all the troops that were with us, they got into the barn and got instructions on what to do, and I was in charge of a detail, the guard. I had a machine gun, so they put me and two other men up on the road, and they said, if anything comes down this road, stop them. But the rest of them got into the barn and got new instructions on what to do. So I was on guard duty the first day of the Battle of the Bulge. And from then on, I was on guard duty.
Was it a long night and a cold night?
I was cold, long, and we were trying to keep warm. But two guys would have to stay awake while one guy slept. And that's how we went out on the first night of the Battle of the Bulge. Yeah.
Did you have enough ammunition?
We were short on. We had ammunition for the day because we had 2 boxes of machine gun ammunition with us, but we never really were loaded with ammunition.
Yeah.
Never in the Battle of the Bulge.
So about 500 rounds for your machine gun, which lasts about, 3 minutes?
It wouldn't last too long.
Yeah.
Two belts, 2 boxes wouldn't last.
Yeah.
About 6-7 minutes, I guess. Yeah.
What was your introduction into the Bulge?
We arrived up at Warmont and was sent down to the southern flank. And as things went on, should I tell the story?
About the paratroopers?
Oh, about retreating out of frature.
You can tell that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, anyhow, on December 20th, we were sent up to this little town of frature. And as the speaker told you, General Montgomery ordered to straighten out our lines. To get into this town of frature, we had to go through a valley called Loas Boas. And it was about 2-3 miles long, and there's a creek and a roadbed through there. To get back out of this town when we got the orders to retreat, we had to go back through this valley. About halfway through, I heard names called, and finally I heard my name called. I went up there, and we did not have a lieutenant because our captain was killed, and the platoon leader was the staff sergeant. Anyhow, I says to him, what are we to do? And he says, I want you to get up on that mountain and intercept a patrol that's coming through. We were not told the patrol was up on that mountain. So I said, ask him who was in charge, and he says, get up on that mountain. About halfway up, there was 4 of us. About halfway up, I said to the fellows, somebody has got to be in charge, that we just don't go there point blank. And you know damn well when I said somebody's got to be in charge. Well, anyhow, I said to the fellows, well, on top of this mountain, you could see right straight down the mountain, but there was these big 20-inch maple trees. I said, when we get up on top of that mountain, we will hide behind that patrol and wait for that patrol to come through. As we got up on top of the mountain, I placed the first one on the crest of the mountain, and I was just about ready to place the second one. And right now, I had a Tommy gun shoved in my neck. This patrol was doing what we were going to do, hide behind this mountain. I, shaking like a leaf, put this gun in my neck. I gave the password. When I gave the password, he gave me the counter password. He motioned for his troops to go on. They all were dressed in parachute jumpsuits. And as they went by us, they kept the Tommy guns trained on us. I asked them where they were from in the States. They would not talk to us. But as we were sent up on the mountain, they told us it was either 508 parachute or it could be Germans dressed in the parachute units. And to this day, I still think they were Germans.
We left in comparatively good weather, but as we went north in these 2.5 tons wide, it got worse and worse and worse. And I don't really recall where we were at any time in the Bulge. But I'll never forget January 3rd. We were mostly in reserve with other units. But the 517 well, I was 2nd Battalion, and we didn't hit anything really serious until January 3rd. The 1st Battalion was up at Manhay, and they had a lot of problems up there. But we were in reserve, and then we actually went January 3rd, 8 o'clock in the morning. I recall General Gavin talking with our commanders up in Bowlby, 100 feet away or so. And I said, oh, something must be up. And sure enough, we took off out of the forest. And I was a scout with my outfit, and I was leading my platoon. And we came across open ground, and it was a cemetery. And all of a sudden, we got under a terrible blast of some kind of fire, I'm sure a lot of mortars and artillery. And around us were holes that seemed to be just recently dug from you could tell because on the white snow and everything, it was dark dirt. Well, we didn't pay anything attention to them, but it got pretty bad. And about a few minutes later, after we passed this open field, which actually was a cemetery, and a round of something got me, and it killed my commander, and a couple other guys got wounded, and I didn't get much of a scratch, but just a concussion. And later on, I found out that these holes, this is after I woke up in February sometime, that these holes, and my buddies were telling me that they were dug and zeroed in. And if you got in those holes, boy, those mortars would just pop right into you. So, well, I never did, but we kept going because I was leading the platoon. But anyway, I was very fortunate not to have been killed in that blast, whatever it was, but here I am today.
Right after we got in there, they put us on the attack, and there was a book written about it, the Battle of Sadzo, a little town, we call it Sadsack. And we got a presidential unit citation for helping to materially destroy major portions of the 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. And the guy wrote this book about it, and my wife and I were in the town after the war about 15, 20 years ago, they treated us like conquering heroes. So really, and the town looked a lot different then than it did when I was there. And then the war went on, and we kept on going back and forth in the cold. It was miserable. A lot of guys, you know, when they tell war stories, they don't let the want of a few facts spoil a good story. And some of the guys will say, boy, was it ever cold? It was 10 below zero. Well, most of us up here, when you say 10 below zero, boy, that's pretty darn cold. Well, actually, that was Celsius, which isn't quite as cold as 10 below zero, but is about 10 above. But that's still pretty cold when you get wet and the snow and the cold, and then you freeze at night. So it was a tough deal.
Bob, tell the story
Then
about
we
your tank
went
attack.
along and got into. I hadn't had my clothes off. I went in there. What is it, about the 17th of December, and we got into a town called Spa, which has spas in there for taking baths. So we got hot baths and so forth. And I hadn't had my clothes off since the 17th of December. And the next morning, we were supposed to go on the attack again, and for some reason or other, we didn't. So we spent another day in that warm, nice spa area. It was a great break to have. But we went in and we rode in on tanks, and we could come into this wooded area. So we all got off the tanks and formed up and went on the attack. We were attached to the 7th Armored Division. We were all depleted on troops. I suppose maybe there was, my battalion probably only had 300 men left, about half the strength. But we went on the attack, got through this woods, and we come down a long open field, looked like a meadow, coming into a town. It was a little town called Bourne. We were on our way to go to St. Vith, which was the northern flank, crossroads about as important as Bastogne. And as we were crossing this field, there was the company of tanks ahead of us, and we were walking along using marching fire. I think, I probably went through two bandoliers of ammunition coming across that field. As we started to get closer to the town, the 88s opened up and knocked out the tanks to the right of me. And as that tank was, the right of me got hit and blew up, the tank in front of me stopped short and backed up, and I stumbled, and he ran over both my legs. And he got over me about, 2 or 3, 4 yards, and they hit it again and knocked off a track. Then they hit it again, and it blew up. And I know this can be authorized because the 7th Armored Division, I was in their paper that they wrote about a guy getting run over by a tank and walking away. Only they exaggerated it a little. I crawled away. And the medics picked me up, and I went into the general hospital in Liège, Belgium, but I was only there for 3 weeks because they were just bleeding for replacements. In the meanwhile, my battalion had got down to 46 men, and they pulled it all out. And all the guys in our battalion either went to the 101st or the 82nd, one of the 82nd regiments, and to go. And of course, I went into the 505, so I finished up the war in the 505.
Al, you had a story about the fog of war from the end of the Battle of the Bulge.
The what?
The fog of war, where you had a campfire one night.
Oh, yeah, we were crossing the 6 feet line. And I guess they got the deal where in Germany, all these people that defend that line are the town, and they have to move up to their defensive positions. Anyhow, General Gavin had 3 tanks, and he had knocked out this pillbox. But we were the infantry coming up from behind, and they, well, anyhow, they had knocked out the pillbox, and our company moved up, and behind the bunker there was a bowl-shaped impression where the Germans had made a bonfire. And so that's, when we got there, the company, the officers went in the bunker, and the company went to build a big bonfire, and we were sitting there in this bowl-shaped thing. We're just relaxing, and all of a sudden we were a little ways away from the fire, and here a German patrol comes right up, and they got right next to the fire, and they're warming themselves up, warming their hands up, and all the guys behind them are yelling, "Get down, get out of there!" But they couldn't understand it but they knew that we didn't like them being there. Anyhow, this German, whoever was in charge of the patrol, he finally realized that he was in the wrong place. So he ordered the guys, they went out, and they went back into the middle of the dark night, and we never sent anybody after them. But if we would have started shooting, we would have shot more of our own men than those 8 or 10 men on the patrol. But that was kind of a fun, they'd walk right in there, get warm, and then walk right out.
Okay, I think that's going to do it. If you'd like to come up and talk to our veterans for a little while, you can. Thank you for coming.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.